rhetorics of multiculturalism are easily undermined through everyday racism and social injustice. Today, I'll be showing you how racism against migrants still exists in present-day Australia through governmentality, racial biopolitics, and social justice. Multiculturalism in Australia has reached new highs. 6.7 million people, or 28.2% of its residential population, were born overseas, the highest in 120 years, and government cultural diversity programs, such as A Multicultural Australia, abound. Famous migrants include the former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard, and one of the world's top rugby players, Quade Cooper. However, is Australia's multiculturality really celebrated?
There is nothing secular or non-racial about them.
It seems that there has been another racist attack against another Indian.
I'm gonna kill you, dog.
I haven't done anything to you.
If I catch you on a
Now, class, we will move into the concepts that explain how racism came about. What is governmentality? Besides being hard to pronounce, it can be understood as a triangle linking the state, society, and self that results in behavior regulation.
We can understand space as geometrically divided and embedded within power relations. For example, state policies can result in the creation of social norms, which affects how individuals conduct themselves. Racial biopolitics, conducted through governmentality, involves the categorization of bodies according to phenotypical difference.
What this means is how certain skin colors are favored over others, and hence the popularity of whitening creams in India. Finally, social justice is a thread that runs throughout the entire video, concerning how privilege is distributed among individuals through racism. This oppression can be seen in stereotypes, cultural norms, and everyday life. Most people picture a drug dealer or convict as a person of color, although this might not always be the case. Privileges such as access to education, higher wages, healthcare services, and quality of life are often marked by whiteness due to the practices of racial biopolitics and governmentality mentioned above.
Now that we have the boring concepts out of the way, we will go back in time to understand how prior state regulations laid the foundations for present-day racism in Australia. Australia began as an immigrant nation, with its colonisation in 1788 by the British, followed by the arrival of convicts, soldiers, and their wives. However, the introduction of the White Australia Policy, or the Immigration Restriction Act, in 1901 is largely seen as the cornerstone of racism in Australia. Policy aimed to create utopia with an exclusively white community, as the first Prime Minister was afraid all us races would become more successful and humiliate white men. White supremacy? More like white insecurity. Under the policy, all coloured people had to take a European language test. But there's a 3% pass rate. The test was in a language many of the migrants were unfamiliar with. Anyway, the test reflected how there was a lack of social justice in immigration policies due to the exclusion and disadvantaging of coloured migrants.
That's true.
As a result of the policy, much of Australia remained white. Finally, in 1966, the racist immigration policy was formally abandoned, once again allowing the entrance of blacks and yellows. Although this marked the milestone for coloured people, the damage of constructing whiteness as normative in Australia had already been done.
Against racist policies and treatments in the present are in fact hallmarks of the immigration policy, such as the One Australia policy intended to end multiculturalism, the racist One Nation Party, and the Australian Protectionist Party.
The state has played a role in racism in present-day Australia, but society perpetuates this racism too.
What? Basically, the denial of privilege or social justice can occur between two racial groups.
Help! There's an Indian man being attacked!
Well, you guys should be able to fight the attackers off. Stop being such pansies. We don't think this is serious enough to warrant an investigation. These things happen all the time. You guys are just unlucky. Racist attacks? Ha!
Throughout 2009 and 2010, there have been a series of physical attacks against South Asian international students in Melbourne and Sydney. These attacks include robbery, assault, setting them on fire, and verbal attacks. However, these are perfectly normal occurrences and happen to white Australians too. So, we're not covering that tonight. Back to some entertainment news. Did you know that goats drink milk and they eat grass?
These attacks are not racially motivated and are stupid wanton acts that can happen to anyone.
The routine denial of racism in Australia has led to the whitewashing of the media, pun intended, where news reports and prominent politicians blatantly ignore the racism towards South Asians. This exhibits the societal impact on social injustice, where there is the obvious manipulation of media power to position South Asians as the invisible other. Another way society exhibits racism would be in employment practices.
Are you saying that there's racism here?
Yes, I think so. Classic example is where I study in Sydney University. There's one of my friend whose name is Tim. He's a white Australian guy. He's applied for the part-time accounting jobs, and he has got called back for 5 interviews, and I've got none.
Furthermore, there is also the presence of victim blaming, where the authorities have implied that South Asian victims are passive, weak, and soft targets, and were at fault for being at dangerous places at night. These forms of racial essentializing are dangerous, as they create and reinforce racial stereotyping. As mentioned earlier, the state and the society regulates how racism is played out in present-day Australia. On the individual level, South Asians themselves practice self-regulation, such as the avoiding of certain places or deciding to live within established ethnic enclaves in order to reduce their exposure to racist behavior.
Hey, I heard that you have plans to study in Australia. Yeah, do you know much about Australia? Oh, perhaps it's not the best to study in Australia. It's almost normal for people to get beaten up or threatened just based on their skin color. I think there are many other places where you can further your studies without having to worry about your safety, like Singapore. But if you really want to study in Australia, perhaps you could stay in one of the Indian enclaves. There will be everything you need, from Indian spices to cultural activities and the emotional support like you get back at home.
So, is Australia's multiculturality really celebrated?
Although people from many different countries, such as South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Afghanistan, live down under, many of their lives are turned upside down due to the pervasive racism, as the video has shown. However, these experiences are not limited to South Asian migrants.
Chinese oh, but you got them birds on your slut. You Chinese.
How do you tell if violence is racially motivated?
Now if 2 white people fight over a girl, that's a fight. So a white man and a Lebanese man fight over a girl, becomes a racist fight.
In the end, the first step that should be taken would be to address the absence of racism in the media.
The only way we could get rid of racism in Australia is if we talk about it. All they want to do is deny on TV we have no racism.